Well, wow, those were pointed readings, right? I had a time in my life when I was reading the Sermon on the Mount every day. I think that was really a good thing for me, and going over this again made me think maybe I should return to that. Those pointed readings, man, I kind of found myself in a couple of places. I wonder if you did. I mean, it's pretty easy, don't you think, to fall into making sure that people are aware of all the good that you do? It's easy to fall into that. And when we do that, what's happening is we're getting sucked into the tyranny of praise. And I call it tyranny because craving praise and approval of others too much can just suck the life right out of us. And Jesus goes on, gets fairly acerbic here, right? I mean, calling those good deeds play acting. Play acting. Play acting that ends up with just the fading applause, echoing through an empty room. Pointed. Maybe what he's trying to say is, praise will never be enough. It will never be enough. And we'll feel empty and we'll get pretty exhausted running around looking for praise and approval. I know this because I've done it before. Then the Luke 6 passage is like the other side of the coin, and that coin always turns up when we feel like we're not getting enough praise. We want to jump on the faults of others. It just follows, doesn't it? And it's really easy to get in that place. And I think these ideas are so very basic, especially most of us are, well over 25, and we've known this stuff a long time. And the thing about it is, for me, the most basic things sometimes that I need to revisit over and over. And so we're not here today to wag our fingers and talk about good and bad behavior. What we're doing is just trying to talk about what really makes life work best. Not just for me, not just for you, but for all of us. Because as we always say in 11:11, our lives are inextricably linked. And what we think and what we say and what we do affects all of us. And so today, and by the way, isn't that kingdom of God stuff? What we do and what we say and what we think affecting all of us and trying to figure out what works best in life? That's kingdom of God stuff. So today we're continuing our conversation then about pairs of preoccupations that can really squeeze the life out of us like a cocoon that we stay in too long. And Tom introduced us to that metaphor a couple of weeks ago. These preoccupations, as I'm calling them, are pairs of emotions or reactions or responses that we put out there in response to what's going on around us. In the first week, Tom talked about the construct of success and failure. And then last week, he talked about fame and shame. And he talked about how that each of these ideas motivate our behavior, but he also noted that we might ought to question our definitions of these things. And certainly we might ought to question the value that we put on them and decide who said anyway that these things are as they are, valuable or invaluable or good or bad. And so he said all of that to help us think about how to get unstuck from patterns that take us to negative outcomes. Well, I'm going to keep going on that today, and I'm going to talk about praise and blame. And the idea is really the same, that if we live our lives motivated by these things, it's going to be exhausting. It's going to be difficult, if not harmful. So the things that Jesus said and that Ann Sexton said are really useful to us as we try to think about our personal lives and how we might order our lives or adjust and readjust in the course of life. And so they're especially useful to us personally. But I want to say also that they're pretty useful if we find ourselves in harmful relationships with people who need too much praise or who blame others too quickly. I sit in my office a lot talking with people who are in those very, very relationships. And it's important to name those, to see those things in a partner or a fellow worker, or maybe on the macro level in the culture in which we live, so that by recognizing the problems of praise and blame, we can figure out what are our options for getting out if we need to, or for avoiding alliances that take us down a bad road. Well, on a more moderate level, there is always going to be praise and blame. That's just the way it is. And it's true as if just like with the other pairs of reactions that Tom talked about, there's always going to be all of it. And it's also true that we usually want one of them and not the other. We want success and not failure, duh. We want fame and not shame. And we want praise and not blame. But the fact is, we're always going to get all of them, so we've got to figure out a healthy way to operate. There's a little story from the Buddhist tradition that helps us think about the fact that we will always have blame. A man went to a monastery to seek wisdom. And the first monk he saw had taken a vow of silence, but he didn't know that, so he asked his question. Well, the monk said nothing. Wow, the questioner was really angry, and he stomped off because the monk had said nothing in the face of his very profound question. So he's angry. Well, he decided to go back the second day, still hoping to find wisdom, and this time he asked a monk who was quite a philosopher and a possessor of vast theoretical knowledge. So he lays his question out there. The monk launches into a long discourse with lots of footnotes and trajectories and parenthetical statements and all kinds of words. The man who asked the question was so exasperated that he said, "Will I get an answer in my lifetime?" And he stomped off, angry again. Well, he wasn't going to give up. So the third day, he's going back. Once again, he's tenacious. Well, the monks had heard about him, and they'd gotten together, and they said to yet a third monk, "Now look, this guy's coming, and if he comes, be sure to just say enough, not too much, not too much, not too little." So he lays his question out there, and the monk is very judicious, choosing just the right words, just perfect grammar, and he was very clear. And the man was angry. "How dare you treat my profound question in such a sketchy way?" From this, the Buddha is saying, you will always have blame. If you say nothing, some people will blame you. If you say too much, some people will blame you. If you say only a little, some people will blame you. You will always have blame. We just have to live with it, right? But I hate it. Don't you? I want praise. But there's this interesting entanglement between praise and blame. I mean, praise feels great. It's like bacon for the brain, right? The more you have, the more you want. I check the USDA calculations from time to time, hoping that bacon has been moved over to the column of white meat. Well, I checked again yesterday. It's not there, so no bacon for you today. But praise is wonderful. It feels great until we don't get enough of it. Until we feel like that someone has overlooked us, or someone failed to see how good we are, or someone disagreed with us. And then our feelings are hurt. We feel overlooked, underappreciated. Maybe we feel invisible. I heard a teacher discussing this very thing. She was talking about the Enneagram, which is a model that people use to talk about different personality types. And since she was talking about the type that I think is my personality, I was really listening to this part. And she said that she also is this same personality type. And she said that people like us really need to be liked. And so she told a story about how that played out in her life as a teacher, as a public speaker. She told about a day when she literally chased after praise. She's leading a discussion. Everything's going great. There's lots of interaction, lots of questions for her. It was just going great, except there was one man in the audience who said nothing. And his face was very stoic, non-committal. She said she could feel her heart beating the whole time just seeing him, you know. And so when break time came, she said, "I nearly broke my foot pressing through the crowd of people to get to him so I could chit-chat, so I could loosen him up, so I could get him to like me." She told on herself. And she said, I later laughed at myself at thought about how I really wasn't interested in how his day was going, or I was motivated by my need for praise and approval. And we all laughed at that story. But I thought, goodness, that kind of honesty will really pay off. It's like a little self-check to realize it when we're doing it. So the point is, we can really drive ourselves crazy, right? Chasing after approval. And I think just about every one of us have somebody in our life that we're trying to win over, trying to impress. Maybe we could reduce our anxiety just a little bit by at least being aware of it and realizing the basic fact of life, and that is we're not important to everybody. It's really an unrealistic expectation. And furthermore, you nor I are making everyone else feel important all the time either. So it's kind of a time to just check ourselves and think about our thinking, as my husband often says. So I've been saying all along that praise and blame are always going to come our way, but knowing that does not mean that we don't care. Maybe the question is, how much do I care? How much can I afford to care? How much can I afford to care and still be at peace with myself? How much can I afford to care to still be in charge of my own emotions? How much can I afford to care and be my authentic self? I bring that up because I know that sometimes seeking praise and avoiding blame takes us to a place that is not authentic. I'm not acting out of my authentic self when I find myself saying or doing things just so I get some praise or just so I avoid some blame. That's cocoon living. So Sharon Salzberg is a meditation teacher, and she's an author of several best-selling books. She recently wrote an article in the Huffington Post about praise and blame. And she asked herself, if I'm only happy when universally, uniformly, and entirely praised, and if I'm not happy when there's disagreement or a single frowning face, it seems I just won't be happy very often at all. She goes on to ask, what if we could decide just to take that negative feedback, maybe just for a minute, just take it without immediate pushback, without immediate resistance and excuse making. Just try taking it, and at the same time keeping an open mind to what we might learn. Sure, we might decide that the criticism, the blaming, whatever, is invalid, but at least we will have slowed down and given ourselves a little space, a little peace to think about it. And I think that slowing down thing is pretty much a key. Slowing down our reactions when we've been disagreed with or blamed, or however we want to phrase this, disapproved of, slowing down our responses is a key to detaching a little bit so that we're not weighed down with it. We're not burdened by it. Let's try that. I'm going to try it. I really am. Slow down. On the other hand, Salzberg asked one more question. Can we take praise, just like we were going to take the disagreement and the disapproval? Can we also take praise without thinking that we have nothing else to learn? Remember praise and bacon? It feels really good. Doesn't mean we have nothing else to learn. It's good to remember that. You think we wouldn't forget that, but I've seen people who seem to have forgotten it. They're so enamored of the praise that they get that suddenly they're in charge of the rest of the conversation. Nobody else is in the room. Nobody else is at the table. So can we take praise and just let it warm us and then move on and be with everyone else in the room? Finally, I want to say that, not only are praise and blame always a part of our experience, they are also both fleeting. That's a good thing. Maybe if our responses could also be fleeting, we could loosen up a little. We could break out of that cocoon that's holding us so tightly sometimes when we're living our lives around praise and blame. The bad thing about a cocoon is there's just room for one person in there, and that's pretty lonely. So I wish we were going to sing Butterflies Are Free. That song's going through my head. So anyway, let's try it. We're all in this together. Let's try to burst out of our cocoon.